This is the Working with Warriors podcast by the team at the Regional Men's Health Initiative.
Hello and welcome. My name's Owen Caddo and I'm joined today by fellow team members Terry Melrose and Glenn Duncan. How are you guys?
Yeah, well, thanks, Owen. How are you, mate?
Well, thanks, Owen.
Yeah, going well. Look, this podcast session we're really talking about the premise of risky behaviour is normal for all males. And I think we've got to set that platform as a base of what we do, and we talk a fair bit about it in a lot of different contexts, but we'll just unpack that a little bit today. And I guess the premise of that, Glenn, is around a fair bit around our identity and how we describe our health and well-being.
Yeah, and when we're talking about our health and well-being, we like to break it into those three components of physical, which I suppose in its easiest form is kind of like the mechanical. It's how the body operates, the inputs and the outputs, and mechanically how it moves. And the mental is how we cope with life's competing demands, be that through work or relationship and our ability to bounce back from adversity and things like that. But the big one that quite often gets left out and sort of before anyone rolls their eyes and thinks, oh God, he's going to talk about religion, is social spiritual well-being. As much as there's a place for that, some people find that in a faith-based religion, other people find it in all sorts of places. So whether it's your love of volunteering, your passion for music, it's your passions, it's your interests, it's the things that make you you. And it's so important as life goes on that we have these other irons in the fire so that when one aspect of our life might be struggling, we're still enjoying some degree of enjoyment and success in other regions.
Yeah, and it is pretty important, Glenn, that we say through our ages and stages that whether it's adolescence, midlife or in retirement transition, that we've got that capacity and we've built up that capacity through those things that you've described. And, you know, we acknowledge that there are many different aspects to our life and we're challenged at every stage and age of who we are and what our identity is. Terry?
Yeah, exactly right, Owen. And in our education with young men, it is just having that conversation with these young men, middle-aged men and our older men that, you know, we've got to be comfortable in our own skin. And I remember as a young fella being told, if you're too busy trying to be someone else, then who's going to be you? You know, and it does come back to how we ultimately get our identity, and we talk a bit about that nature versus nurture, and I know you're going to go into some of those facts about how we are hardwired, but thinking about how we're brought up, you know, how we were encouraged to talk about our emotions, and as young men we have that psyche in modern times to think, you know, I can do it alone, you know, where that warrior attitude, which we'll unpack in another podcast, and challenging some of those roles around masculinity. And I was just talking to a group of young fellas the other day about and they were wanting to be able to show some vulnerability. So we are hardened over time. We tend to ignore self-needs and we get a bit annoyed when people tell blokes to get in touch with their feminine side, but it's okay to get in touch with those emotional things and things that make us tick. I think as young fellas, we've all worried about what others will think of us, and we've got to talk and acknowledge about peer pressure doesn't only happen when we're young through all those stages of life, and we see it with influences in media and social media now. There's a lot more things telling guys how they should be and how should they act and behave. And also, you'll touch on that aspect of winning, but I think, you know, we have that fear of failure, and there are a lot of guys lacking confidence and just confused about what it is to be a man in today's society, and I think that's where the line gets blurred a little bit.
I think so, Terry, and I guess the premise as well is we work on that we are, because we talk to a lot of ladies, but we are the same species, but our DNA is 99.9% the same, but we do have to just challenge that little difference and explain it, because it's not right or wrong, but it just is the way it is. And I always say that, you know, we're hardwired in three different ways than the ladies, and that is we communicate differently than the ladies, and that's obvious from a young age. The research from babies through to adults, our approach to winning is generally different than ladies, because, you know, 50% of blokes think that that's the most important thing in the whole wide world, while as 90% think winning is important generally. So that gets us into a spotter, and we take risks, and that risk taking is part of our hard wiring in our DNA, and we get less risk adverse as we age. So, I've had a situation where I've had my son and myself and my dad in my little workshop, and we were building a barbecue, and we were cutting corners and taking risks to get it done so we could cook on the bloody thing that day. And the three of us had a different approach, but we're all risk takers. So we have to acknowledge that. And I guess part of that risk taking is that we're overrepresented, Glenn, in a lot of our health stats, which are really bloke focused.
Yeah, so we're certainly on the wrong side of the ledger for so many things, and a lot of the things that we're on the wrong side of the ledger for, there's no physiological reason for it. Stroke and heart attack, diseases like bowel cancer, that's one of the ones that there's no physiological reason. It's we're just missing a marketing beauty in terms of we are dying at high rates because we don't give a shit, because that's what we need to do. We need to mail it off when we get the letter.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Obviously prostate and testicular cancers, but stroke and heart disease also. Injuries, particularly workplace injuries, workplace deaths, I think, is around the 92% mark. And so we're wildly overrepresented in those. Suicide, obviously, motor vehicle accidents, there's a bigger gender difference the more remote you get with those as well. And then I suppose there's always that mistaken belief in your own invincibility. Everyone says it's not going to happen to me, including all those people that it happens to. So yeah, believing that you're invincible comes back to bite you.
Yeah, and those stats, I mean, they don't lie. And like on the injuries, we're only just over half of the workforce, but we make up nearly, as you say, 90% of the injuries. And I think coming back to, as you said, Owen, how we're hardwired, that winning attitude is about getting the job done. And sometimes we miss some of those risks because we are solution focused, and when we're under the pump, we need to highlight that even more so, if we're not sleeping, if we're distressed or carrying some other problems in our life, those we can become more susceptible to some of those risks because we become a bit more tunnel vision.
Yeah, we do, and the focus is on getting that job done, Terry. And I guess the other big difference that we talk about is our brain development and how between ladies and boys, and the general research shows that ladies' brain is developed around that 18 to 20 or fully developed, and blokes between 25 and say 30, and that contributes to a lot of that risk taking, and some ladies might even, or some people might suggest that our brain development takes till 45 or 50 for a few of us, but there is that difference, and we need to acknowledge that difference, and it's in that prime age for our young blokes of 20 to 30 that the difference is pronounced.
Yeah, look, and that's why we highlight that risk-taking is a big challenge for our men, our warriors, but especially our young ones. And I use a bit of the analogy of I suppose young blokes are walking around with faulty brakes and the foot on the accelerator. And what I mean by that is our prefrontal lobe. That's that, and I'm not going to get too much into the neuroscience of it. I'm definitely not qualified for that. But in a nutshell, prefrontal lobe is there to that higher decision making and functioning. Decision making, assessing risk and consequence. And as you say, if that's not fully developed till 25 or 30, so that's there for our brakes. Meanwhile, we got this other part of the brain, the amygdala, which is there sort of around impulse control, aggression, and that's like our accelerator. And we know for boys that's actually bigger in our young men than girls. And also when guys get together, that part of the brain is actually overstimulated as well. So we got this part of the brain saying go, 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 and a little part at the front that's the brakes haven't fully beat it in yet, I suppose.
Yeah, look, and there's that other chemical too, which I won't talk about. There's a lot of research on the internet because I'm not an expert on it, but it's GABA, the chemical which is the stop-go chemical, and we'll talk about social media in a minute, but that's the actual environment that we're living in now, and our young people are living in, exposed to social media, is actually changing how that yes-no, stop-go affects our young people.
Yeah, that part of the brain around the reward centre.
Yeah,
so that chemical that's released and around things of pleasure, and we used to talk about it, for the first time we were exposed to drug or alcohol in those late teens or early adulthood, the brain was flooded with that GABA chemical, but now we know that's released with social media, with iPads, with gaming, and that's getting flooded and released at kids who are on those things before they can even walk.
Yep. So I guess we look at and we talk about, we're all under pressure, doesn't matter of our age and stage, but we always when we're chatting, especially young people in footy clubs, we just say, what are the risks for you? And we need to go through some of them because they are life skill risks. What I mean by that, they're with us for life. So we have to confront them at some point.
Yeah, and they can range and they change during our life, but some of them keep reoccurring. So there's some risk. It might be how we get on with others. It might be financial issues. That there could be legal issues that are risks for you. So decisions around education and work, drugs, and we talk quite often about the differing reasons why people might take on drugs, and some it's to experiment. Yeah. But peer pressure can really be something that fires that up as well, and peer pressure and the risks associated with that. And you were talking just then about social media, the fact that you're exposed to peer groups over a much wider area and more constantly than ever before in the history of man really, I suppose, exacerbates those peer pressure problems and family problems. And then there's the stuff that we don't even talk about.
Yeah, and I think that relationships is an important one to talk to around for our young men's and especially in those formative years, Owen. Like, we are a product of our environment, and if we're hanging around other blokes who are up to no good, taking unnecessary risks, then that does impact then our choices we make and the situations we can get into. So it is encouraging guys to form those good and healthy relationships and have that safe place, even in those early formative years. I think will reduce some of that risk-taking behaviour.
Well, and I think there is an old saying that we are the average of the 6 or 8 people that we hang around, that we end up. So that's that social environment conditioning us as well. And it is pretty important that we play an active role in who our peers that we want to hang around and what we want to do. But I just want to expand a little bit more. So around that social media, Terry, it is there's lots of good things about social media, and there's lots of bad things about social media. But when we speak to some of the experts, we do have to have the ability, once again, for young people, but old people to turn it off, to have a break from it, and to be yourself. And you see that. You guys have got young children now. I had young children. I don't allow social media at my dinner table. The phones have got to be elsewhere, just as a simple little thing. But we have to expand on that when we're chatting with our young people.
Definitely, and we are creatures of habits, and we can really set those habits in stone as young people, because we are in those formative years. We are a bit more susceptible to influence, and as I said, if we don't see the consequences of our actions and behaviours till a bit later. So, social media definitely for young people, it is a point of connection, and they have that interaction with their peers, but it's not as I suppose the way we talk, it's not helping them with their communication over time and really having that one-on-one to verbalise what's going on in their life, how they're feeling. It's, things like Snapchat, Instagram, it's very short, it's very brief. So, having a circuit breaker is really, really important, and encouraging them to get out, participation, be actively involved in their sporting clubs, exploring work options. And we talk about that, young guys are faced with huge pressures now around decisions and those pathways for employment, start now in year 10 when they're 15. And really reinforces the importance, I suppose, of mentors and older men being there with them to walk that journey a bit more rather than leaving them to their devices.
Yeah, and I think with all of the social media aspect as well, it's that instant gratification. So we've actually got to be able to enjoy whatever's happening in the present ourselves, rather than be focused on putting it on all those mediums that you suggested, Terry, and sharing it with the world, which people couldn't give a stuff about because, you get overloaded with other stuff. But you actually focusing on you will help you, with your risk-taking going forward.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that brings about that being comfortable in our own skin. And we talk about decision-making can be tough, but the fact being empowered that we've got a choice, to have a choice, is a good thing. It means, we're not getting told what to do. It's ultimately on us to make those choices.
There's a amusing comedy routine that I actually shared a while back that dealt with the fact that social media has is responsible a bit for the fact that there's probably this push for mindfulness these days, because pre-social media, that was probably the natural state of things. We were with ourselves, and the comedy routine went down the line of when's the last time you actually went to the toot, and it was just to go to the toot, because you end up, somebody takes their phone in and then they're scrolling away, and you're never with yourself, purely with yourself at any point these days. The real push for mindfulness has probably come about because we're just constantly bloody connected.
Yeah, look, and there is that, when I was doing my social work degree, we spoke about that being comfortable with the uncomfortable, and sometimes for people just to sit in silence and be still is awkward and uncomfortable, and hence why the constant scroll, the constant need for stimulation and gratification is pretty detrimental. So it actually disconnects us from actually feeling our emotions and what's actually going on, and whether that's feeling some pain or joy or happiness or awkwardness. I think it's almost designed to numb us and become a bit, routined and disconnected from what's actually going on in life.
Yeah, and we've got a lot going on. We've got to acknowledge that, and life has changed, and I do acknowledge that in terms of social media, and from black and white TVs to the iPhones only in the early 2000s that it was taken off. So it's pretty important. So I guess we say, working and living safely is always, my responsibility, and industry, and they'd have all this OH&S and all that kind of stuff. But if to protect individuals and people in the workplace, but if my head's not there and I'm adverse to risk taking, or whichever my approach to risk taking, because I'm through that age and stage and not dealing with it, we still got to just push the point that it is my responsibility and the consequences are mine. And we'll talk further about that in the next podcast, and we'll talk further about the alcohol and drugs when we talk about capacity in the next podcast. But
and I just think a good takeaway message there, Owen, is about bringing it back to my responsibility, and yes, young people sometimes don't see the risk, but we've got a really good picture, and we'll put it up on our podcast page. But it's of a young fella up the top of a big hill standing on a skateboard, and you get young guys to look at that picture and what's going to happen to him, what's going on. And they have a bit of a laugh, and he's going to shoot off the edge or run into a power pole. But when you look at it, he's actually still standing there. He hasn't actually gone yet. He's still got 1 foot on and 1 foot off. And I think that's all we can employ our young men, our middle-aged men, our older men, is when we're facing that crossroad, that difficult choice, that moment of peer pressure, is just to take a breath, take a step back, have a think. Just have 1 foot on, 1 foot off. It's not a sign of weakness, or it is just about taking that minute to assess the situation and then go forward.
Absolutely. And I guess we just kind of finish this podcast with 3 summation points about being prepared to think for yourself, because we have to. We always say program time out and think through the consequences, because the consequences are with you for the rest of your life. And be willing to talk to appropriate people and mentors. Those mentors might come from any area of our life. So I think pretty important that we just kind of acknowledge that in our age and stage stuff when we're having conversation with blokes. We'll talk further in the next podcast, but take care and look after ourselves, and acknowledge that we are risk takers and the reason behind it, so we can work to improve it.
Good on you, Alan. Thanks, mate. Thanks
Thanks,
Glenn.
Al.
Cheers, guys.
Talk to a mate, just let him know you're there. Talk to me, mate. Oh yeah.
Thank you for listening to our Working with Warriors podcast series.